I destroyed my personal brand on accident 18 months ago, and I wish I knew this one fucking thing. I had to pay $1,600 to learn this lesson. I'm gonna give it to you for free. And I even developed a script framework so you can just steal it and use that forever. So if you're actively sharing stuff that you're doing from your experiments or the mistakes that you've made, you need to listen up, because that's exactly what I was doing, and that's exactly the blunder that I made. If you're making this mistake today, you're probably turning your audience away. They don't trust you, and they're definitely not gonna buy from you. So for some context, I was working on a Google Ads agency a while ago. One of the things I did was I made content, and I would share the things that I would do. So experiments, actions, effort-based content, essentially. And I would make mistakes, and I would share those mistakes because I would want others to see the mistakes that I'm making, and they could learn from me and shortcut their way to success. But here's the main problem. I wasn't sharing the lesson that I learned. I kept that for myself and internalized it, but I never actually put it into a digestible, distilled format for the audience to take away. Long story short, I left the story as a loser. So let me explain what that means. I paid somebody, a content marketing expert, for their time and about $1,600, and they pointed this out to me. They said, all the content that you're making about mistakes is great because you are learning something and actively sharing that with your audience, and it's putting you in the trenches. That's cool. And then they said, but in all your Google Ads experiments, you don't actually share what it is that you've learned. You just kind of leave it on a cliffhanger, and you leave the story as a loser. So don't do that. You need to come out on top. So I pondered what he meant by that, and as I thought about it more, I realized he was right. I would share an experiment that went wrong. Like, I spent this much money and this experiment bombed. The CTR did not work, the creatives did not work, and that was it. I didn't say anything after that. And I was just kind of documenting my journey, and at the end of it, I would just be like, hey, if you want to work with me, click this link. But looking back, that's so dumb, because like, why would any client watch a video where I just like lost money on learning on a creative strategy, and then they would book a link with me so they could lose their money? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's just like so mind-boggling to me how I just didn't like understand this. But that I paid $1,600 for that lesson, and I basically walked away with insane ROI, because now I know that every single time I share content, I need to leave as a winner or someone that has evolved from the mistake. So that was a lesson that I learned from the mistake that I made, and here's the framework that I made, and this is the takeaway that I want to give to you. So the framework goes as follows. You have the hook, which is how you start your video. Then you have the context, right? So this is basically what you're going to share about the beginning of your story and how it all started. Then you have the mistake, which is where you really go into depth on the mistake you're making and the stakes, right? Then from there, you're going to go into the lesson, which is the direct learnings that you took away from the mistake, and the takeaway. Now the lesson is for you, and the takeaway is for your audience. So the lesson is what you learn internally. The takeaway is an actionable, distilled piece of content that you can make and put that on YouTube or wherever, and so your audience can actually watch that. And they will see that, one, you are actively in the trenches, learning, making mistakes. Two, you're doing what you preach. And three, you are actually learning from your mistakes and you are evolving. So it's okay to make mistakes. And I think making mistakes is awesome. I think sharing them is awesome because it makes you relatable. It's human. Everyone makes mistakes. And I think personal brands need to be a little bit more raw and authentic. They just can't be as polished as like a company brand, for example. So you can share a mistake and you can be a loser for a moment, but you can't be a loser for a lifetime. So here's my main takeaway from this, is every piece of content has a purpose. And if you're operating on a platform like YouTube where content has insane longevity, like for years, you want the piece of content to make sense in all contexts of time. So you want it to make sense 3 years from now and today. So you don't want to be a loser 3 years from now. Like, oh, I learned how to do this one very basic thing, but 5 years later, someone sees that piece of content, they're like, oh, this guy's a beginner. But if you say, hey, I learned this, and this is my takeaway, they will always leave the story seeing you as someone that has transformed, and that's all stories are. It's just transformation and change. So it's very satisfying to see someone go through trials and tribulations and come out a better person. So you need to end your stories as someone that has evolved and has become a better person, and you are now evolved. And if they choose to work with you, it'll be because they want to work with someone that is the most evolved version of themselves. They don't want to work with someone that's just made a mistake. But have you made a mistake and then learned from it? That's who we want to work with. That's who I want to work with. So that's how I see it. That's how I think the audience would operate. And ever since I started doing that, my personal brand, like, people trust me more on sales calls, and that's just kind of an implicit feeling. I can't really measure that, but I just feel like people trust me more and they lean on my advice more, versus before it felt like I was really fighting on every sales call to prove the value of what I was doing. So that's my main takeaway. So I previously used to look unorganized, unprofessional, inept, but now I come off as a victor, a winner, someone that's taking away lessons from the mistakes that I'm making, and it makes me look better. It makes my personal brand look more relatable, and more evolutionary, and someone that's actually growing. So TLDR, don't leave your story a loser. Come out on top. Show that you have learned and evolved, just like you would do in a job interview. What's your biggest mistake or whatever, and how did you overcome that? So do that in all your content and come out as a hero, and people will want to work with you, or at the very least, they'll trust you more. That's just what I've seen from my experience. Maybe that'll help you out. So feel free to steal that framework and try that out in your next video. All right, keeping awesome. Till next time. Peace.